Hello and welcome to today's webinar. Now, this is weird. So I, believe it or not, I'm in the office. I've been here for 3 days. It's a weird feeling being in an office. It's very strange. But today we're here to talk, not about me being in the office. We're here to talk about affordable housing. Now, for most of us, affordable housing typically is the kind of the part of the scheme that you try to avoid. We try to make off-site payments. We try to stop affordable housing being a thing. But actually, it's a very lucrative use, in effect, for a scheme. And actually, to help us understand that today, we've got two very interesting people who have fortunately just arrived. So we're looking good. So firstly, we have Andy Rhodes from Foster Green and Brown, who's the founder there. Hey, Andy, how you doing?
Yeah, very well. Thank you, Paul.
Very good, very good. Look, just like the photo we've got in front of us here, it's very, very similar. Amazing.
A little bit older.
So Andy is the ex-land planning director at Bromford Homes. They're a housing association that got, about 100,000 properties or something. It's kind of a huge, great big beast of a business. And he's sort of, since then, he's turned land agent, and kind of land agent with a bit of a difference, really. And we'll kind of come on to that in a moment. So great to see you, Andy. I know we have Brett Plant here from Oxygen Partners. Hey, Brett, you there? I think you're there.
Hello, Paul. Yeah, nice to see you. Hi, Andy. Yeah, very well, thank you.
Very good. So Oxygen Partners is like a training mentorship, but kind of with a difference, really. They sort of go a stage further than that, almost like into a sort of a franchise model. They kind of really support you through a sort of affordable housing journey, in effect. So this is the panel we've got here today. Very exciting. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I suppose first thing to do really is just kind of to perhaps get to know the two of you, really. So the first question really, I suppose, perhaps to you, Andy, is kind of why set up FG&B? Kind of what was the kind of motivation behind all of that?
It's a very straightforward decision in the end, Paul, really. I'd been involved with affordable housing since I'd left education at sort of 21, worked for a number of different organisations within the Midlands, delivered all sorts of great affordable housing schemes, but really felt like I could do more good from as a support to other associations and contracted developers specialising in affordable housing than I could do within one specific organisation. So I felt like I wanted to help more organisations to deliver more affordable homes.
Yeah, cool. I suppose same for you, Brett. Kind of what made you set up Oxygen Partners? Kind of what was the motivation behind that?
Yeah, okay, so not too dissimilar to Andy, and you'll probably find that a lot in this sector. But I've been in property for 22 years now. Since 2012, we've been involved in affordable. And it's because I want a bit more, exactly how Andy's saying, really. Use our skills to deliver something that gives a little bit more than just the property, so helping those in need, making a difference, really. There's something else, a different dimension to it. We also noticed there was a bit of a gap, I suppose, where developers coming from that side, the private development market, were struggling to get sites to work, to stack. Some HAs and the majority really do appreciate you taking opportunities to them. They've not got their own departments within their organisation. So if you've got a need from both sides and you can offer a solution in the middle, it seems an obvious thing to do, and you get the benefit of being able to make a difference socially, the positive impact on the back end of it.
Yeah, totally. And you guys do a bit of kind of take that next level, don't you, in terms of the sort of social care elements, things that you do as well. So kind of sort of a stage.
We've got a social care and social care development company as well. Yeah,
sort of really walking that talking it, but equally kind of walking it and doing lots around that too. So amazing stuff. So well, let's kind of jump into affordable housing. Say kind of for me, it's always been that thing you try to negotiate out of a site. So kind of what are the sort of, why is that wrong? Kind of what are the benefits of affordable housing? And I think Brett, you might have a set of slides for this, and I think
I can bring those up.
Slightly new here. So I had one golden rule in life a few weeks ago when we had Tom Block's Urban Splash, was never share a video on Zoom, which we both tried and both failed. My other golden rule in life is only in very select occasions do we share a set of slides. So we're going to try that today and see how this works. We're going to sort of present in sort of together, if that makes sense. So I'm
sure between us we can work this out. So I've got the slides though, Paul. Yeah. So
I just want to share your screen and get us going with that then, if you could.
Right, so everything crossed. How's that looking?
looking amazing, amazing.
Wonderful.
There we are.
Okay, so that's our mugshots.
So
Yeah, so we took a little bit there, Paul. I'll just talk through these slides because I've just put them together finally at the last minute. So that's the why that we just mentioned from Andy.
yeah,
Our why there as well, about making a difference.
yeah.
And I think you want to talk about the sort of the benefits, if you like, or the myth busting, as you've said. So perhaps over to you, Andy. These are your slides coming up first, so go for it.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. It's sort of moving on to the benefits of delivering, and this is not just necessarily around an open market scheme with a policy compliant Section 106 level of affordable housing, but this is where I think there will be benefits, but actually this is more focused on someone who might be considering developing a scheme for entirely affordable housing. And you know, one of the real issues that I'm sure everyone on this call will appreciate is that the planning system is very, very difficult to navigate, time consuming, complex, expensive. Affordable housing isn't the panacea to all of those problems, but it can start to help, particularly if you identify the right partner for the right site. So if you're looking at a specific site in a specific location, there's a piece of work you can do to understand who might be best connected with the local planning authority from an association perspective, so that you can make sure you've got the right partner on board, and you can then start to leverage the benefits of their relationships and their history within the locations. They will know specific local authorities intimately. There's also some financial benefits that come along with considering 100% affordable schemes. One of which is that you can start to look at ways of reducing some of the obligations around your planning application. So Section 106 commuted sums, level of affordable housing and potential for grant funding them, but also start looking at the sill relief as well. So some of those sums, which can be, as we all know, very expensive in specific locations, can start to fall away when we start to look at 100% affordable uses.
Cool. And that kind of relationship, I suppose, in my head, there's kind of it's because then the local council understand that housing association actually has a need, and therefore the need's clear, and therefore because of that we can start thinking about, well, how might we sort of flex things and help kind of push this forward. Is that kind of
correct? But I think there's probably a little bit more to it than that, Paul, where the local planning authority will know the personnel within the organisations. They'll know all the good that they're delivering on the ground in terms of housing management and social value. They'll trust them to do the right thing for that particular development site. Whereas if it's just Mr. Unscrupulous developer arriving to make bucket loads of cash, which can often be the perception, it's a very different conversation. It's not a partnering conversation. It becomes quite adversarial. So I think it's really around their belief that actually the associations have got the local authority's best interests at heart.
Interesting. Different dynamic in that negotiation, or kind of different dynamic in the way you go forward. Really interesting. And then Brett, kind of what about you? What's your? Sorry, you've got more. Sorry, apologies.
Sorry,
apologies.
Yeah, I've got a couple. Sorry, I've got a couple of slides.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, so I think sort of getting down to the sort of more financial aspects of of developing affordable housing, I guess. I would say from a viability perspective, the perception probably is that an open market scheme will always generate a stronger land value than an affordable scheme might. That's a complete myth. It certainly isn't true. There's certain locations and certain value brackets where actually an affordable scheme will probably generate you a higher land value than an open market scheme will. Partly because of some of the benefits that are highlighted on the slide. So you can start to have conversations with the local authorities and Homes England about introducing public sector grant into that Section 106 element if you're delivering 100% affordable schemes. Your funding requirement falls away because of, or significantly reduces because of the way the contracting package is structured in terms of sort of a housing association payment to contract a developer. And obviously I've already touched on it on the previous slide, but you've got the opportunity to negotiate more aggressively on some of those planning obligations that you may not have been able to negotiate on if you'd have just been looking at a traditional open market development.
And that sort of sweet spot then, Andy, for you is sort of 180 a foot to 270 a foot kind of sales values, new build sales values?
Correct. That's exactly right, Paul. I mean, and that's not to say that you won't be able to deliver affordable schemes outside of those value brackets. I mean, 180 a foot, probably what that really means is, you know, the lowest end of the market, that up to something that is quite decent in the Midlands. I should say that, you know, my business is focused in and around the Midlands and Northwest. So, you know, I'm sure there'll be geographical variances, particularly down in the southeast, but in the Midlands, if you've got a site location that's would deliver an open market sales value of between 180 and 270 pound a foot, I would say that an affordable use will certainly compete on land value. Over 270 pound a foot, it might start to become difficult. Not to say you can't, but you'll need to think about doing things differently. Introducing perhaps additional grant funding, really starting to leverage some of the planning benefits we've talked about previously, and probably pushing density to a point which will start to feel uncomfortable.
Interesting. Cool. And then, yeah, that one.
Yeah, okay. So I thought this was a really interesting slide and potential benefit to particularly the contractors that might be on this call. And that's really around the size of the market that is currently delivering affordable homes within the UK. So you can see the top 50 developing housing associations, registered providers, completed over 40,000 homes in 2020. I mean, it's a significant amount. Some of those will have been delivered through Section 106, but there's also obviously a massive grant funded programme. £6.6 billion worth of investment by those top 50. And actually, I had a quick look yesterday, and I think the view would be a lot of that is grant funding. It wasn't. It was grant funding probably did make up just under 15% of that total investment.
Right.
So you know, these organisations are putting their hand in their pocket and borrowing on the back of their existing assets, but some significant amounts of money. In terms of the size of the market, in terms of different associations, you know, there's believe it or not, there's 30,000 different housing associations across the UK. Not all of those are developing organisations. They're not all looking to build their own homes, but there is a massive market of organisations sitting out there that do want to develop their own homes. So aside of the top 50 or the Homes England strategic partners, who tend to be the ones that get most of the positive press, there's a lot of regional and local housing associations who are equally able and capable of delivering new homes themselves.
And that would be anything from what, a few units or 10 units, or kind of what sort of level does affordable start at?
Yeah, I mean, probably, you know, you'll find that the majority of organisations now, as the affordable market's maturing and becoming more professionalised, I guess, they will be sort of really seeing the benefits of scale. So I think you will find that on the whole, they'll be looking to develop schemes of a minimum of 10 homes, probably more than 20 on any individual site. But where the need arises, they will deliver refurbishment schemes, empty homes programs, key worker schemes. So on the whole, I would say, as a general rule of thumb, no less than 10, but there'll always be exceptions and where the need arises.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, if I just add to that, Paul, actually. So yeah. Absolutely, yeah. I think we'll touch it on one of my slides later, but just a quick mention there. It's I found it's very much linked to the size of the organisation. We've got some really bespoke organisations local to us, and we've done as little as 2 new units with those guys. We've just done one with 9 blocks of 1-bed apartments. Those kind of schemes wouldn't be of any interest to the Bromfords, you know, where Andy used to be part of. It's just not. It's not economical, is it, for you to do that kind of thing, Andy? But there are others that can't.
Yeah, that's right.
Budget stuff.
That's right.
So yeah, again, we'll talk about it in a moment. I think it's always good to talk and find out exactly what the individual associations require.
Yeah, cool. So it sounds pretty positive. Is there anything more you can add to that, Brett, in terms of the sort of other advantages of affordable housing?
Yeah, so Andy's obviously coming at it from his background, his experience, and some great sort of stats, and it's really good to share the size of the market. Just that in itself, I think, starts to debunk some of the negative connotations you get when you start to look at the size of the market, the opportunities. Andy said, as it's becoming more and more professional, if you like, it becomes easier to work within. I'm coming at it from a slightly different angle. As I mentioned earlier, I've also found that the advantages are you're approaching it on a business to business level. So you're selling to another organization who want to take the whole site rather than building out and selling individual units. And there is a shortage of sites. There's, in my experience, more demand, more funding. And if you can help and assist the HAs, you're working in collaboration, as I say, in a business to business environment. So that's, for me, you don't feel like you're pushing the sale. And if you can get your mindset right, that you're working together, you'll go a lot further. You'll get much more positive results and positive communication. So not to go over what Andy's just mentioned, but there's definitely opportunities to unlock sites when you bring grant funding in and the other savings, the sales section 106 contributions, when you take those out. Conventional development sites, creek, it's very often landowners that may be a bit unrealistic in what they're wanting to achieve. If you can join the dots again, close the gap by taking out those costs, you can get sites to work where others can't. This is just something how we see it. It is a business opportunity in and of itself, really, just to work within this sector because of the size of it, because of the opportunities, because of the different types, the variety within this sector. It's actually, again, Andy touched on it, but there's so much and so many specialist HAs, you can pretty much cover all kind of housing within it. So just within that sector, it's an opportunity on its own. For many years, we were developing privately as well. And we were using this alongside that. So when you find a site, it may work for private if that's your preference and that's your strategy. But if you've done all the hard work and you've found a site, it's very possible that you can move it and work with a housing association if they want to use it rather than private development. So I think, like I say, it's using the opportunity to generate more revenue, really broaden what you can do. And something that we do a lot more of, and we've done it for many years, but we are doing more of it. What we're talking about largely here is the development side of it, but we also use all of the Nimbus tools to identify sites for lease as well. So Andy said the number of HAs that we've got in the UK, there's a percentage, a proportion of those that develop new, but the rest of them to acquire properties to house individuals, they will take leases. So there's opportunities for both as well. So as I say, the size of the market actually is quite considerable when you really start to peel back the layers. And just because of that demand, I see that as an interesting advantage in itself. You feel like you're swimming with the tide when you can understand it properly. So that, as I say, that'd be my sort of angle on it. We talked about the other kind of advantages maybe being financial. Why I like it and what I said earlier about being a solution for developers. Over the years, I've had a couple of contractors go into liquidation halfway through a build on me, and it leaves you kind of high and dry. If you can partner with the right housing association, use their checks and balances and what they need to demonstrate, or a contractor to demonstrate, and then you can set up an arrangement where the build contractor is directly with them using their funding. You're not borrowing any funding of your own, but you're also getting out of that risk loop of of being the other part of the JCT contract, the developer part. So we've always found that as a pretty solid business model, really.
You're more a facilitator rather than actually sort of in the contract process in many ways. You're putting all documents together and they're entering them directly rather than you being part of that and on the hook for it.
Yeah, that is true. And I wouldn't want to say you're deferring all responsibility because, and Andy, you'll know this, housing associations are quite strict in their requirements. Yeah. So they'll do all of their checks and balances as long as they're happy that the appointed contractor meets those. They're happy, and it is quite strict and diligent, but it does also, it leaves us out of that loop. Just to have guaranteed exits in uncertain markets has always carried a lot of weight for me. Perhaps now more than ever, I'd argue. What is the market going to be doing in 2 years' time if you took on a private development? If you can get your sales agreed or essentially the site sold at a pre-agreed figure, you miss out all of that risk that comes with delays, overruns, overspends, etc. And when you're selling a private development, let's just say 20 units, you don't actually start to make your revenue, your profit, I should say, until the last 2 or 3 get sold. All the rest is paying down your lending. So again, you can approach this quite differently, and just in a developer frame of mind, there's a lot of advantages that way. Again, got touched on earlier, but arguably some developers might shy away from land or opportunities in the lower value areas. These work really well for housing associations, and you can put really competitive offers forward that work for everybody in perhaps the lower value areas. And again, getting sites to work that perhaps wouldn't under other circumstances.
I think that's kind of really interesting as well, because I tend to find in those low value areas, there's a lot more opportunity as well. There's a lot more sites there because they don't really kind of stack up for anything else. And so there's very few people kind of target those areas to go and find, those little 10-unit schemes and this sort of stuff, because, if I find them, I can't make a private housing scheme stack up anyway. So
yeah, absolutely.
They've been trawled all over, so it's kind of often quite easy to find that stuff.
And even if it did stack financially, there's always a question mark over saleability. If you build out, you draw all of your funds down to build it, and you're sitting on these units and you can't sell them, that's not a place that you want to be either.
Quite.
So it kind of works for everybody. And I said earlier, it's kind of for me, I always see it as a business to business relationship. You're dealing with an individual or a series of individuals, rather than fractured sales of selling one unit and then the next and the next. So the legals are much easier to manage. The timescales are a lot easier to predict. Just looking at it as from that point of view, that's how I would see a lot of the advantages coming into this as well.
Yeah, it's de-risking that exit, isn't it, basically? Bring it forward in many ways. Kind of hit PC and it's gone, rather than having to start your sales process at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. So what else have we got? Oh yeah, timescales. Timescales is an interesting one. I mentioned the sales process there. Let's just have a quick look what we've got on this slide. Okay, so with conventional development, clearly you're going to identify the site, secure it through your conveyancing, through your legal process. You're going to have a planning period, discharge of conditions to get on site. Then you've got the build period, which is going to be lengthy, and you've got a sales period, which is kind of open-ended. You don't really know how long that's going to be. So just to elaborate on that a little bit more, we have to identify the site, go through the conveyancing period. We take land through planning by and large, but you can provide land that's already got planning. To get on site and package as we do, we discharge conditions as well, so the contractor can get on site. But as I say, there's no build period and there's no sales period at the end. So the risk element is taken out of it, but also the time scales from when we get our revenue and our income in is massively reduced. So some comments at the bottom there, a decent sized site, it's not unusual for it to be 2 years start to finish before we start to see our profits. We have done sites in 6 months, and you'll know that's pretty rare, but it is possible. The bigger the site, the more complex, the longer it's going to be. But we have done sites in 6 months.
But I think the sort of the general point that actually on a traditional open market scheme, particularly as the scale of the site increases, that you're probably building to a sales rate rather than a build rate. Whereas for a housing association use, you're building as quickly as you can, in all honesty. So, you get the benefit of reduction in prelims, you get the benefit of the pre-sale. So, there are some significant advantages.
Amazing. Interesting.
So yeah. So
on the other side of that coin then, so what about the challenges of affordable housing? We kind of talked about some benefits, which kind of is planning, sales values, kind of the bringing it forward, the de-risking of all of that. What about the other side of that? Kind of what are the challenges around affordable housing?
I think this is back over to me, Paul.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I think that some of the strengths that we've touched on so far in the presentation, like most things in life, often people's biggest strength is also their biggest weakness, isn't it? And I think we've talked around 30,000 associations. We've talked about ones varying in scale, so they've all got different requirements. They all operate across different geographies. They've all got different standards that they want to build to. They've all got significant expertise and experience in the Homes England funding regime, for example. all of this will sound to the average open market developer like complete and utter jargon. The organisations culturally will be different to the type of organisation that you may have worked for in the past. They will be much more customer focused, less around always scrutinising cost and margin. You know, not to say that the finances aren't important to them, but it's not the be all and end all. That brings a completely different angle to generally all the conversations. There'll be a lot of different people that will need to be consulted. You won't go to one person and get an answer. They'll need to speak with a housing management colleague about the rented element, probably a sales colleague around the sales element. They'll have to speak with internal colleagues around ongoing maintenance and specification requirements. So one organisation will have a preference for a specific type of boiler. So then that's without us even starting to get into the conversation around what type of affordable housing are we delivering. Is it social rent? Is it affordable rent? Is it shared ownership? Is it a rent to buy product? Is it one of the lease products that Brett's already talked about? So it's because it's such a massive sector, there's a lot of different moving parts within it. All of this means that there's different languages, different words, like there is in many different sectors. You know, we all talk in different ways depending on who we're talking with, don't we? But I think that is the biggest challenge if you wanted to try and break into delivering affordable housing schemes. It is, how do you understand the history, the legacy of the organisations and that particular discipline of affordable housing, which does have a lot of rules and regulations.
Interesting. What about you, Anne? What about you, Brett?
Yeah, so again, similar really, barriers to entry. I think getting that relationship to be to break through and get that relationship, but build it up and to be strong and consistent, I think is really important. I think because you've got that business to business relationship, getting to understand what the individual needs as he's representing the housing association, he or she is representing the housing association, that's really important. But I think once you can and you're seen to be a trusted partner, I think, because you've got that business to business relationship, things become a lot easier after the first time. So it's very possible, because if you're serving their need and essentially helping some of the development directors or the new business team to grow and help do their job, it's more than possible when it's presented in the right way. But it can be frustrating perhaps to get callbacks immediately. But Andy will be testament to this. They're busy individuals. There's a lot going on. There is a lot of meetings they have to go through. There's a lot happens in the background for this to happen. So it's tangible for us. I've used bureaucracy. It's a bit of a harsh word there, but there is so many procedures and audits and things that happen within these organisations. And Andy's worked with them. We've got Paul who works for us, who's 35 years in the sector as a development director. I haven't been that side of the desk, but being in it for as long as I have, you kind of understand it. And I think it's important to understand it, and rather than it being frustrated, help them with what they've got to do, know what has to happen for them to be able to work with you. But it can at times be slower. This can be a little bit tough, I suppose, if you've got maybe owners that are pushing for an answer on your offer on their land, for example. Maybe tough if it's an auction purchase that you've got a deadline on and you're waiting for answers or confirmation back that it's of interest. So you just have to work within that. If you're direct to vendor or through an agent, you should be able to manage this, but there are times where it's going to be tougher than others. Again, there's strategic partners, larger HAs that have already got pre-agreed grant funding, essentially, and it's the grant that helps them be competitive. Others, smaller ones, have to apply for grant, and not always are they successful. We've just done 2 schemes with one housing association, one organisation. They got grant funding for one scheme and not the other. So it's it's something of a consideration. But you need that confirmation from them as soon as possible, because if you're doing a lot of work in the background, you need to make sure that it's definitely going to go ahead.
The model feels a lot more like a kind of commercial pre-sale in effect. If you're doing a scheme to co-op, then you're working out what do they want. They want to know what their customers want. They're looking at demographic analysis and that kind of stuff. And it's very similar, and it's kind of, well, I'm going to build you this specification, you're going to take it, whether it's leasehold or freehold. It's kind of all the same thing, and the benefit of that is that when I hit PC, the agreement for lease kicks in and they take it, and kind of happy days, and I can sell the investment. And it's a very similar sort of thing, isn't it? And they've got got to consult with their location planners, and they've got to consult with internally, got to get their board sign-offs and this sort of stuff. It's all very, very similar. It's just with a housing-based product rather than a retail-based product.
I completely agree, Paul, and I actually think some of the housing associations get a really rough ride, because I think what perhaps the wider property sector doesn't necessarily understand is that I think affordable housing is a discipline in itself, in the same way as a commercial development is people are commercial developers, they're build to rent, PRS developers, open market developers. So actually, I'm not sure why we think affordable isn't its own discipline, and I'm pretty confident it actually is. And then we get into the situation where we're sort of at cross purposes, because an open market developer is talking in a language that they're comfortable with around sales rates and rates per square foot. The housing association's talking in terms that they're comfortable with, which might be local housing allowance, rent levels, it might be social rents, and no one really is able to understand what the other party is saying.
Needs a translation in the middle.
Yeah, no, I agree. And
those we can think of. If only there was people that could do that. That's
the other thing I'd just like to add to that as well is that the schemes that are produced are of a good standard, and they're a far cry from perhaps what people think many years ago affordable or social housing was. You had Tom from Urban Splash on. They do an awful lot with a very large housing association, and I've done for many years, and they're putting some really contemporary stuff out, but in partnership and funded in the same way. So it's the image, not only the mechanics of it and the language that's perhaps alien to some people, but the image that people have of affordable housing has kind of long changed. It's pretty outdated, really.
Andy, you got anything to say? So, you want to add to that? You
No, I was completely in agreement.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so what does a good site look like then, Andy? What does one look like for you?
I think I was going to say, I think this will be different things to different people, in truth, but in the area of the market that we operate within, typically the size of site would be between 20 and 70 plots. So it's not to say that you can't do smaller sites, it's not to say that you can't do larger sites. You've got to bear in mind that a lot of the benefits that come with delivering schemes for an affordable use come because it's 100% affordable housing, and that is why the viability starts to look so attractive. If you start to get to a scale of scheme, and I'm thinking more around the sort of suburban locations rather than the southwest, but if you're starting to deliver a scheme of 150 homes, there starts to become some considerations around whether it's actually the right use for the site. So 150 rented homes in one location may well not be the right use for the site, and actually most housing associations would probably agree that 150 rented homes in one location isn't quite right because of some of the social issues that can generate longer term. So I think if you're looking to deliver volume, and I say volume meaning sites over a number of sites over a number of years as a contractor, if you focused on the 20 to 70 bracket, you will get interest from a number of associations in each of the sites you're looking at. They will compete against each other because it helps them deliver the volume. And let's not forget, these guys are targeted to deliver affordable homes themselves. Many of them have aspirations to grow their portfolio by 2,000 homes a year, particularly the top 50 that we've already touched on. 2,000 homes a year is going some, so you don't really want to be delivering 2,000 homes over sites of 20. So if you can deliver it over the 50 to 70,
yeah,
it's too many. Urban, well located, chimney pots, very, very important. That's what's generating the demand.
Bus stops, all that kind of stuff, that sort of thing.
Access to shops, access to public transport, access to jobs. It's important that people who are living in the homes are able to get to places to earn some money.
But that would be, bus route's good enough, so on the bus into town, jobs in town.
Yeah, the same things that the rest of the world look for when they're buying their houses. In truth, where's the train station? Can I get in and out of, where I'm sitting here, you know, the question would be, can I get in and out of Birmingham? Can I get on the can I get a bus to somewhere? If I've got a car, can I get somewhere where I can earn some money relatively quickly? So it's no different to, you know, the commuting decision we all have to make when we're buying our homes. It's just a bit more pronounced for some people, and they're less able to select the location that they're living in. So we have to make sure it's well connected and that there's facilities available, schools, places to go and exercise. But many of the same conversations that we have on any when any of us are buying homes. So well connected is important. I say I've touched on that sort of rate per square foot value again. I think, you know, I'm not saying that you can't deliver affordable housing above £280 a square foot. You can, but I think you will find that it will be a lot easier to deliver it below, particularly in the sort of the northern and middle part of the country. I think there's probably a view that housing associations are okay with flats, and they are to a degree, but normally as part of a balanced portfolio. So if you started to introduce to associations blocks of 40, 50 flats regularly, I think you'd quickly turn them off. It's not really what they're looking to deliver. It's not, you know, they are typically trying to provide family housing, which doesn't generally mean two-story housing across, you know, 20 dwellings per acre and 15 to 20 dwellings per acre, and sort of 2 and 3 bed houses. It's also useful if the site is at the upper end of the 180 to 270, 280 pound a square foot bracket, just so that we can start introducing a blend of tenures. I think the benefits of having a site £250 a square foot and upwards is that shared ownership, it starts to become a really attractive proposition. You can generate additional land value through delivering those shared ownership properties. It allows you to do slightly bigger sites because of the issue I touched on earlier, where, you know, you may not want to deliver an entirely rented scheme over a certain size, starts to drop away because you can introduce a rent to buy product or a shared ownership product, and generally that is the type of sites that the associations I'd be working with typically would be looking for.
Brilliant. What about you, Brett? Yeah,
so again, in danger of, well, not wanting to repeat what Andy's saying there, because that's some fantastic information, and armed with that kind of understanding, you'll go a long way to delivering what your HA clients require. We take an approach of also fostering and nurturing that relationship, and then simply asking our guys what they want. It is fed from local authority. The local plan will say where the local authority want to develop. You've got housing targets, you've got affordable targets. These are the kind of information that the HA will pick up on. And we can kind of use their research and their corporate plans perhaps to guide us. So we come at it from a point of view of, you tell us what you need and we'll go away and find it. You said earlier about the commercial, the co-ops, you know, Aldi's, whatever. They've done their homework already about where they'd like to be positioned. So ask your HA is what I'd say, if possible. Definitely go pre-armed and pre-equipped with everything Andy's just said, absolutely. To get to the finer points, I'd be asking them. The reason for that is they may have a site very close to your scheme, but that might be a chance to go to another HA. Ask them the size of site. We've definitely talked on that. And again, I absolutely agree with what Andy's saying. A sweet spot for us as a starting point would be around 20 units. We have in recent years done more of the specialist stuff, as I said earlier, which tends to be a lot of 1-bed apartments at the moment, which you can really sort of condense into the smaller sites, infill. 20 houses, well, we've got 9, I'll show an example in a minute. We've got 19 on 0.65 of an acre. But the small bits of infill, you can get 8, 9, 10 apartments on a really, really compact piece of land, of which there's more of. And location as well. So again, as I said, ask them where they'd like to be. What have they got in recent years and months in that area? So we always come at it from that angle. And what that's doing in our experience is continuing to bolster that relationship. So where Andy was at Bromford as the development director, our guys and us, we were saying to tell us exactly what you're struggling to find. Can we help you? And it's tools like Nimbus and other things that we'd be using to do that. go a step further, and we, after, you know, sort of fostering that relationship, we do ask them what they're able to pay, and to establish an offer as soon as possible, only because we don't want to be looking at sites that a landowner is so unrealistic, or for whatever reason it's just not going to get to where we need it to be. So we just try and establish that as soon as possible. What we've always been able to work with as well is, once we've done one site or even had an idea of what our HAs are able to pay for that area, we can take that as a template, and we know, without going back to them for every scheme that we see, roughly what sort of rates they're going to be paying. So what is a good site for me is what's a good site for our HA, to be specific about it. But absolutely what Andy said, you know, these parameters that so you touched on here, yeah, absolutely perfect. We're in the East Midlands, Andy's in the West Midlands, so very similar figures to that. Blocks of apartments we found are, for us, the smaller compact sites, as I mentioned. From our experience, is when you get into London and places like that, where apartments generally are just more accepted, that has to be the way to deliver more housing. Apartment blocks are kind of accepted more by housing associations as well. This is a case study.
Yeah.
Do you want me to run through a case study?
Yeah, please. Yeah, please.
So this is a site we acquired a couple of years ago. It's built out now, handed over in Eastwood in Nottinghamshire. So 19 homes, 15 houses and 4 apartments. So a little bit of infill. It was a corner plot, actually. It was an old police offices. So we bought it from the police authority. We went into a joint venture with the contractor. I'll tell you about that in a minute, about the site acquisition. So it was actually on the market, and we put an offer in against others. But because we've got a long-standing relationship with this particular housing association partner, we kind of knew what we'd be able to pay. And we were able to put a strong offer in, and we were successful against private developers. The Nimbus we were able to use to research the site, look at comparable prices for open markets for a secondary sort of sense check, if you like. But it was, this is the 0.65 acre site on a corner. All of the things that Andy mentioned, it's on a main road, close to bus stops. There's actually a really nice park behind it. It's a mixture of social rent and shared ownership. So the shared ownership units were looking over the park at the rear. With this particular scheme, and
sorry, Brett, can I just pick up on that? So
yeah.
Just in terms of the difference, just so everyone's kind of clear, difference between the rental only and the shared ownership, just kind of in headline terms, what's the difference between the two of those?
Well, social rent is for those on housing benefit. Affordable rent is a slight, well, 80% thereabouts of market rent. And shared ownership of those individuals that want to purchase their own home, but the housing association will retain a percentage of the ownership. The purchaser pays a rent for a period of time on that. You'd argue that if someone, well, the HAs wanted to effectively sell the shared ownership units, so they need to be more saleable, I suppose. So a nice view, for example, and you know, as Andy said, in a decent value area is a strong advantage for that. Don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Andy?
I think you've probably covered it generally, Brett. I mean, always useful to be able to have a site where you're able to offer alternative tenures. It tends to find a bit more favour with the planning authority, particularly as the sites get bigger. Shared ownership will typically generate a higher land value than a rented product. So, you know, if we sort of general rule of thumb, as much shared ownership as you can convince someone to take on board, really. So no, again, violently agreeing, I think.
I just kind of want to make sure I kind of understood. So in effect, shared ownership is where I come in and me as the individual buys the house, but he pays for half of it up front. The housing association keeps the other half, and then I pay rent on the half I haven't bought, and probably pay a bit off against that as I'm going through sort of several years. So hopefully at the end of it, I may own the whole lot or own kind of more and more of my own house as I go through time, in effect.
Yeah, that's it.
Brilliant.
So with this particular one, and I'm not saying, well, I know Andy deals a lot with contractors, and I'm not saying this would be the first thing to do, if you like. Maybe this is a little bit more as you get a bit more experience with it. But we actually went into a joint venture with the contractor as well as being involved with the land purchase. So we got a share of the profits of the build contract, although that was direct with the housing association.
Okay.
So we had the planning uplift. We took this through planning, but what we did, we created a piece of land, if you like, with a scheme designed hand in hand with our organisation. So they had considerable input in what they wanted, how it looked, number of units, size, layout, everything else. So it's a bespoke product for them. They're getting exactly what they want, which is why it's attractive to them, as opposed to buying other Section 106 properties that they are what they are. And with that, we brought along a build contract and packaged the whole thing up for the Housing Association, and they took the whole package and funded the whole package. So for us to get that delivered, there was no lending for us, which again, I've talked about the advantages for that. No direct build contracts. So I mentioned that as well. Predictable payments. I say that to a degree because we went through the planning process, as predictable as that can be. Yeah, it always has its challenges, but exactly as Andy was saying, with the right partner on board, you can smooth the bumps a little bit, and there is a kind of a need for affordable housing in every authority that's recognised. So we all have to go through the same challenges with that, but it can be softened somewhat.
Yeah, I wouldn't ever describe it as smooth or without trouble, but as you say, I think smoothing out some of the bumps is probably the best description we can come up with.
Yeah. I say predictable income and recession proof. We'd got a subject to planning offer. So if and when we got it through planning, we knew exactly what we were going to get paid and in what time scale after gaining planning would we get it. So when we can be clear on the planning system as best we can, we're using pre-apps, we're getting the feedback loop all the time through that system. So we know we're on the right track. We can start to hang our hat on the numbers a little bit. And from this, we made that kind of figure as a group, if you like.
Brett kind of came through on the drip, did it? So presumably in my head, the model is that you've agreed a price to buy the site, you go and get your planning consent in place, and the HA pays you more than the value of the site, or about the same price the site is that you're buying it at. So you never in effect hold the land, and then they enter the building contract, and then the profits drip fed through on each stage payment, presumably, something like that.
Yeah, so we made a planning uplift. So we agreed a price to purchase the land, but at that point it had no scheme granted on it, permitted on it. So we went and got that scheme and then added value and relevant value to our client. So then they purchased it at the higher value.
Yep.
And then we took a build contract and we had a share in that as well.
Yeah.
So,
it's just like standard pre-sale, isn't it? Basically, it's just a pre-sale of a commercial. Very similar thing we did with one of the co-ops recently, was not that recently, kind of a couple of years ago, but in effect, the day we buy the land, we sell it onto them, and they enter into a build contract with us to develop it out for them. And each time the QS signs off the
drawdown, the payment.
It's kind of
evaluation.
Voice, and you get valuation is the word I was thinking of. There's that repayment back plus a little bit on top for the profit, and you just kind of drip through. It's lovely.
An interesting point with this particular scheme is when we looked at what our total package price was for the land and the build as a total, and then we compared it to open market GDV, and conveniently for us, right opposite was a private sale scheme. And we were more or less 99% of open market value, GDV. But we've done all of that without any lending, because a lot of people also think that there may be a reduction. Now, no, not to say we haven't done schemes, and we have, the figures don't always match 100% of GDV, but this particular instance it did. So it's not like we were having to give a lot away, but even if we were, for me, there's so many benefits along the way that, and looking at it all the time of that collaboration, if we can all make a sustainable profit in our business. We have to approach it as a business, but our clients, the HAs, are getting what they want. The individuals that move into the homes at the end are getting homes that weren't there before. That's fine with me. If we have to make concessions and we meet in the middle and have that collaborative outlook, I think it works.
Quite. Well, it's something in commercial development, you take a lower profit for de-risking it. It's just risk and return, isn't it? And
yeah, exactly.
you're getting all the benefits of the de-risking structure. Stuff for the drop in value. It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you wanted to talk through one of your example sites as well, case studies, Andy.
Yeah, I thought this was an interesting one, and I'm glad I've gone for this one, Brett, because this wasn't actually a site that we were successful with securing, but I did think it was a really good example of how and where housing associations can offer something a little bit different. This is a site in Tenbury Wells. The site's got an outline consent for 35 homes, 40% affordable. So 21 open market, 14 secured under the Section 106. But the access, which is approved, is actually coming in on the northeastern corner, sort of just above where the balancing pond shown on this plan, and that's the approved access. So sort of leading on to really how I tend to try and use Nimbus. What we did here was identify whether there was any alternative accesses, because that's actually coming through an existing private drive. You've got 6 landowners who you've got to negotiate access with. That's not to say you can't come to an agreement, but it's by no means a done deal. There's risks associated with the existing approved access. And actually, there's a local housing association who own a row of properties to the west of the development site. So actually, there's alternative routes into the site that perhaps the existing landowner hadn't necessarily considered. We can use Nimbus company search to find out who's got the properties locally, who owns up these properties, and it flagged up on this one. It was actually Stonewater. So the proposal that went into the landowner was to say, actually, look, you've got an access you're not sure you can deliver at the moment. We've got an access which we can deliver, and we've also got a way, you can see on this sort of site layout plans plotted on top of the topographical survey. The site has some serious level challenges, I think is a diplomatic way of putting it. But actually, by coming in through the west, we can actually take the benefit of the fact that there's a plateau on the west-hand side of the site. So the engineering
site, if it's got a plateau on it.
It's not, yeah, well, it's certainly not flat. It plateaus on the top and then just falls down like fairly significantly. So from an engineering perspective, there was some really significant cost savings by utilising the alternative access. It takes away the negotiation that the existing landowner needs to do, but also allows us to potentially either save some land back or deliver more than the 35 homes which the site's got outline consent for. Of course, that does come with some planning risk, but actually it's not necessarily a bad thing to be able to offer, to offer up to the landowner. We've got a scheme for 35. We might go, we're going to push ourselves here and try and get 45, and we'll enter into an agreement with some form of overage. So, as I say, whilst this site isn't secure, I thought it was an interesting example of how you can use the relationships that the housing associations have and the significant amount of stock that they tend to own to look at sites in a slightly more creative way.
Yeah, totally. And that's kind of probably leads us on to the next bit, doesn't it? In terms of that, how do you use Nimbus? I guess it's kind of the question. It's really interesting. We sort of, when you piece that case study through to kind of which accesses you go and approach and that sort of stuff, isn't it? Really. So
yeah, well, exactly.
Do you want to talk through how you use it, Andy?
Yeah, so I back over to me again, so that I've just talked through how I use the company search on that previous case study, but I actually think the company search is probably the most impressive tool that housing associations don't know or use. So they always seem incredibly surprised when I phone them up and say, you own 63 properties in Tenbury Wells, and actually 14 of them sit directly adjacent to this particular site, and we'd quite like to see whether we could work with you to access this wider site through these properties, and here's the screenshot showing the properties you own. And they're like, well, it takes me 2 weeks to get this information from our GIS guy internally. How come you've got it? So yeah, so essentially here I've done an example with Citizen Housing So that shows you the properties that are registered against their ownership. But I think if you whiz on to the next slide for me, Brett, I think you'll be able to see sort of more zoomed in how the properties show as a more and more zoomed in level. So when a site would, when I'd start reviewing a site, one of the first things I'd do would be to zoom right in on Nimbus, see which housing associations had stock locally. Generally, I'll know who it will be anyway, because I've done so many of these searches, but then start to understand which of them have got the highest volume of properties nearest to the site, because they're obviously already managing properties in these locations. So if you can approach someone who's already got all the existing housing management and maintenance infrastructure in place to manage 30 homes, 40 homes in Tenbury Wells, well, why would you want to approach anyone else, in all honesty? Clearly they need to then work on the figures collaboratively, but in truth, the right association is probably the one who's got the volume of stock locally. They will bring with them all of the relationship benefits we've already talked about previously. Theoretically, they're probably most hungry for those sites in those locations because they're familiar with them, they understand them, they're already managing there. So that's how I would use the company search. I think it's a really useful tool.
Cool.
Planning overlay, I think this, you know, we were waiting for this for a long time, Paul. I'm glad you finally got there.
We did.
I mean, you know, it does exactly what we need it to, doesn't it? It shows us where the planning applications have been submitted, and then, you know, we can have a route around. So I'll use this in two different ways. I'm sure Brett will use it exactly the same. One would be if a housing association identifies that there's a specific requirement in a specific location, you know, clearly we would go and visit Nimbus, see what applications were live and which ones hadn't been developed. But then what we'd also do is, if we were looking at a site, we'd also be thinking about what other sites might be coming forward locally, particularly if there's a you know, shared ownership or an open market angle introduced.
Cool.
And again, I think this is a really useful tool that probably doesn't get the visibility or sort of promotion that it should, Paul, and that's the sales value export. I probably won't do a very good job of explaining how this works because it always takes me a couple of minutes to work it out myself when I try and do it again. But essentially, you know, when we're looking for sales value research, because that is relevant on an affordable scheme, a lot of people will use a percentage of open market value as their rule of thumb for how to generate the you know, the package price or the likely affordable bid. But it's clearly relevant on shared ownership. You know, they need an RICS valuation, so the RICS valuer is going to go out and identify local properties themselves. Why not do a little bit of that work very quickly in the first instance, so that you've got a good sense of where the figures are likely to land. And so what we do here is just draw a simple polygon around the location where we can see that there's new build properties. We'd use a sales value export tool to drop it all into an Excel spreadsheet, which I think I've got a screenshot of on the next slide. And then we'd start sort of manipulating the data. So we remove the stuff we didn't need. So I'd probably start filtering by most recent sale to oldest sale. I'll probably take out anything where there's where it was an existing property. So I'll just leave the new building, and I'll probably start picking out some that look like they may have you know, might be anomalies for any particular reason. Sometimes the EPC data or the way that the property size has been registered isn't accurate. So I'll pull those out, but it will give you a very, very good understanding of the likely achieved open market values within a location very, very quickly.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's just a screenshot of the sort of the Excel export. But as I say, it starts to get manipulated in Excel, and we all know what we're doing in there, don't we?
Yeah, totally. And Brett, how about you?
Yeah, so I will just put it in early doors on this one that it's Tom in our team does a lot of the work on Nimbus now. So any technical questions, you'll have to help me with here, Paul. But how we use it in practical terms, I know what Tom does from a SHLA perspective. So we talked earlier about infill, smaller sites, and even the corner plot that I mentioned. We also look at sites to be allocated from the SLA, and Tom will have one screen open and he'll see where those sites are, and he'll have a second screen open. He'll go and do all of the due diligence and get the information from Nimbus on that site, and it's the usual information. The second thing he does is also go on to particular sites or titles, and exactly the same as Andy did, is do a search or a title report and see what other organisations are around there. And it's actually listed on like the example here, if any of these might be housing associations. I don't know if you can see.
Yes,
Where are we? 2, 3, 4, 5 down. We've got a housing association there. So the information's available.
So that's coming out of the free report, isn't it?
That's right.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, so yeah, key HA contacts through Nimbus, free reports, company acquiring most residential freeholds. That also shows who's active at the moment, inquisitive. SLA, Brownfield Register, and key council policies map. So again, one screen with all of that information on, cross-referencing and drawing down the detailed information from Nimbus for us. The other big part of everything we do, and as I say, we've got Tom and we are sending quite a few letters out, so doing it on scale, is identifying potential larger pieces of land. The top right there, on the right of the top right slide, you'll see there's a cluster of properties all on one freehold. So we'd have a look into that to see if that's likely to be owned by a housing association, and just get some further information on that. And it's more of the process for us of taking it through your workflow within Nimbus, and does a lot of the work for us, linking that up with DocMail and automating the letter sends out, really. And obviously, you know how it works with being able to set an automated number up coming in to take calls that Tom or I, largely Tom, to be fair, will be calling those guys back and discussing if there's something to be done. So really quick access to key information. And also the way there is a way clearly to automate things quite simply, so we can look and keep repeating that process. So on top of everything Andy's said, primarily research tool to see who else is out there, and obviously the second part of it is then reaching out to who might have opportunities to fulfil our pre-established need.
Yeah, cool, brilliant. Well, that was easy enough. Amazing. Thank you both for that. That's cool. Right, so we're sort of running a little bit over, but I think I'd quite like to. There's quite a few questions that are in the chat. So what I'd like to do is, in fact, there's two things actually. One is if you'd like to ask a question to the team here, then if you'd like to just go onto the kind of control panel and raise your hand, then we'll bring that up. We'll just kind of give you kind of chance to quickly look at that. We've got 2 or 3 just raising their hands now. In the meantime, so if anyone would like to see Nimbus in action, we've got a webinar at 2 p.m. on the 8th of March. We've also got, if anybody would like to sort of after the event want to get in touch with Andy, there's Andy's contact details there. What kind of stuff should people get in touch with you about, Andy, if they've got kind of questions and stuff?
Yeah, no. So generally, my work tends to fall into a number of different boxes. One would be if there's contractor developers out there who want someone to help them identify the right buyer for their Section 106 properties on open market schemes. Always happy to assist. The other pieces of work would be, if there's people out there who have control over sites but haven't got the opportunity or the relationships or the expertise actually to work out how best to pull that together for an affordable use. Again, happy to have a conversation, happy to assist, just like to help on these things, in truth. And then on top of that, I think there's also a site finding service that, if people are out there and need assistance finding the right type of affordable sites, happy to help again.
Yeah, cool. And same for you, Brett. How can you help?
Yeah, so it's similar, really. We will help other people with sites if it's something they've got control of and they think they can would like to place it or it'll work best for affordable. I know Andy's over in the West Midlands, what covers quite a large proportion of the West. We're in the East, so either or really on that. What we also do is I suppose, share and educate what we've done to help people do that themselves by creating, you mentioned it earlier, and it's kind of a franchise. It's a regional partnership and affiliation where our affiliates are given an exclusive area. And we kind of like to think that things are done in a certain way within that area. And we help you guys establish a business that works for you doing exactly this wherever you are. And that's kind of what we do. Our real aim is to get national coverage with what we're doing to help overall. So we feel we can do more by doing it that way.
Fabulous. So I've just popped into the chat the links for all of that. So we've got Brett's email address and we've got Andy's email address. There's also links to sign up for the elite, for the webinar with us. I've launched a poll as well. So if you'd like to see the webinar, the first question there's for you, kind of one-to-one demo, which you want to kind of sign up or whatever. That's sort of first question for you. If you want to speak to Andy about a particular site, that second question's for you. And the third question, if you want to speak to Brett and Brett's team about oxygen projects, and that sort of third question's for you. And we've got quite a few questions now, and I've put those same things into the chat. So if anyone kind of wants to jump into those, then feel free. Just going to so James Nicholson's got his hand. I'm going to see if we can get James on. Oh. Hi James. Hi James. How are you doing?
Yeah, very well, thanks. Thanks, Andy and Brett. Thought that was really interesting and actually quite apt at the moment. I'm working through a site that I currently own up in the Northwest. It's a 7 and something acre site. We've got a planning application about to go in for about 116 units, of which 40 to 45% of them are going to be earmarked for affordable by the LPA.
Yeah.
Obviously, current adopted policy is 50-50 split for an intermediate tenure versus rented, but local housing needs assessment sort of dictates more about 82 to 18% in favour of intermediate tenure. And for my appraisal purposes, what's your view on how I should be appraising the value of that intermediate tenure and then the affordable and social rent as a discount to open market? Now, bear in mind, open market's probably north of 400 quid a foot in this location.
Yeah, I was about to say to you, James, I think the danger always is that people are, and it's an absolutely fair rule of thumb, but bear in mind that a percentage of open market value is a rule of thumb. And
yeah,
what I've had a recent example where not actually particularly dissimilar, but there's a site that sits on the Coventry, within the Coventry local authority area, but does look towards Meriden, so a higher value location. It's within Coventry, you know, sales values probably north of 350 a foot, could well be touching £400 a foot, and but you can't be thinking you're going to get a 60% of open market value for your affordable rent and a 72% of open market value for your shared ownership, because it doesn't quite follow through. I would say that as rule of thumbs go, I'd say up to £300 a foot, possibly a bit more. You won't go far wrong with a 55% of OMV for affordable rent, 65 to 70% for your shared ownership or your intermediate tenure, and social rent's probably down at somewhere between 40 and 45% of open market value. When you're starting to touch that £400 a square foot, things start to change, mainly because a lot of housing associations will have a policy that they don't like to exceed or won't exceed local housing allowance levels. So properties could be worth £1,000 a foot. The rent isn't going to budge, and obviously there becomes a question around affordability as well on the shared ownership elements. So they'll start to model smaller first tranche sales, which does impact on the value of the shared ownership element as well. I would say if you're at £400 a foot, I would, from an appraisal perspective, and I'd more than happy to have a proper look at this and run some proper figures, but I'd be minded to keep that affordable rent 55% of open market value or less, and I'd be minded to keep the shared ownership or the intermediate at probably 65% or less.
That's very helpful. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, fabulous. Thanks, James. We've got Caroline wants to ask a question. Hi, Caroline. Just see if we can ask to unmute you. I think. Are you there, Caroline? I think we're struggling with that one. Let's try Philip. We come back to Caroline. She can make it. Hi, Philip. Can you hear us all right? See if just get you to unmute yourself.
Hear me? Yep.
How you doing?
Hello,
Good.
Philip.
Yeah, good presentation. I wanted to ask Andy, because I'm in Birmingham, and I don't know about housing associations, but registered providers, there's a couple that's gone into special measures.
There is, yeah.
How do you avoid, or what can you do for that? I mean, it's okay finding the houses, but what if the housing provider isn't?
Yeah, well, this is sort of. I think we probably didn't really touch on this within the presentation. It's a good question, Philip. But my general view would be that actually, so when you're dealing with registered providers, housing associations, day in, day out, you'll start to get a feel for the ones that are well managed and the ones that are less well managed. So, we can also do some due diligence on the financials, if it's the financials we're concerned about. So, you know, what's their credit rating, you know, Moody's AA2 or whatever it might be. So it's around sort of due diligence on your partner. I guess it's checking and getting a sense. You know, you can tell when organisations are well managed and when they're badly managed through the interactions you have with them. So first port of call, always no different actually to the advice I'd give someone selecting a contractor developer. Always check the finances, make sure that you can see proof of funds, or make sure you can see some sort of credit rating, and then follow it up with sort of whether they appear to be a well managed organisation or not.
It's because there's somebody in the network who's got properties with one of these companies, and they didn't know. So how would I know? I'm new at the business, so there must be sort of flags or warning signs.
So yeah, if I can add to that, it's obviously they're regulated as the regulator of social housing, Philip, and you can draw down information from their website on two main areas: governance and viability. So you can see how well they're run and how strong financially they are. So that's perhaps more of the document to refer to. Everything Andy says, I agree with as well. You get a sense of who they are when you're having dealings with them. Definitely be asking what else they've done, other proof, or just demonstrate other schemes that they've been involved in.
Yeah, and I guess going through Nimbus, I could check on their portfolio if they're selling or if they're buying, or would that show up?
You can certainly see the number of units as Andy demonstrated earlier. So what else they own in a given area, or what they've got freeholds on.
Okay. On the ownership panel, so on the information panel under where it shows the housing association, will tell you how many properties they've sold in the last 18 months as well. So maybe there's kind of lots of those being sold, and it'll tell you what that number is in the information panel too on Nimbus.
Okay.
Well, it's worth saying, Philip, yeah, there are better ones and there are worse ones. So not all housing associations are the same. And just by definition of being a housing association, it certainly doesn't mean to say they're well run. Yeah, we've had some close shaves ourselves, so it's a good question and worth looking into.
And as a beginner, how would either of you be able to help Brett and Andy to be able to? Because I'm already registered with Nimbus for like the year, and Nimbus Plus.
What do you want to do, Philip? Do you want to build for housing associations? Is that where
you build to rent type of thing? Because eventually, I'm sort of starting right at the beginning. To just do a simple buy to let for one house, or the housing associations require more than just one house, don't they?
They do. They like scale. They do like scale. So
the ones that lease, if I can just add that, or the registered providers that lease, may come down as maybe as low as the single units. Philip, I'd always start from the point of finding who you think you want to work with and talking to them about their requirements. Certainly what Andy's saying about the development side of it, what one individual house really isn't viable for them commercially. But if you said you're looking to build to rent or build to lease, so that's a slightly different model. And the way they work is, if you've got a property that they can take a lease on, it's of no difference to them. They haven't got to put it through their processes, their development team, their board. So that's a different viewpoint.
Fabulous. Cool.
Okay, thanks.
Just for that. Brilliant. Well, we've got a load of questions in the Q&A. We've got a load of questions in the chat, but in my usual glorious way, we've overrun by 15 minutes. So, so we're getting better. We're aiming at an hour, and we're getting better. We're an hour and 16 minutes in. So really from me, I suppose the sort of the thing I would like to do now is just to say, firstly, thank you, Brett. Thank you very much indeed for today. Thank you for your presentation. Much appreciated. And then same, thank you, Andy, for your time today and for your presentation too. I think we've sort of learned an awful lot from both of you in terms of how this all works. So thank you much indeed too. And then finally, thank you all to all watching today. We've had a great time, thoroughly enjoyed ourselves. Thank you again. I've been Paul Davis. We've been Nimbus Maps. We'll look forward to seeing you again soon. All the best.